When their father died, the millionaire's son inherited everything. The estate, the money, the land. His brother, just a lame horse everyone said should be put down.
You wasted your life for an animal and memories, and look what it got you.
But Eduardo had no idea that his brother's inheritance came with something he'd lost years ago, the woman he'd once tried to steal.
You never understood Dad, or me, or anything about this place.
When Eduardo returned to sell the farm, he discovered his brother wasn't just healing a broken horse. He was rebuilding a life with the one woman Eduardo had never forgotten.
Anna, you look like you belong here.
She always did, even after you tried to take her away.
Now the brother who had everything realized what he'd truly lost. But when a miracle brings them all together, Eduardo faces an impossible choice: his empire in the city, or fighting for a second chance at the life he abandoned. Will Eduardo win back the woman who chose his brother? Or will his return destroy the only family he has left? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. Eduardo Suarez stepped out of his black Mercedes, sunglasses hiding his eyes from the harsh morning sun. The farmhouse looked smaller than he remembered, weathered, tired, just like his father had been in those final days. Not that Eduardo had been there to see it. "Mr. Suarez, welcome back," said Mrs. Oliveira, his father's housekeeper for 20 years. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. "Thank you," Eduardo said stiffly, straightening his tailored suit. "Where's Gabriel? With the horses? Where else would he be on a day like this?" There was something in her tone that made Eduardo uncomfortable, like he was the stranger here, not the son returning home. The funeral had been yesterday. Eduardo had flown in just in time, sat through the service, and retreated to a hotel in town rather than stay at the farm. Too many memories, too much dirt. He walked toward the barn, his Italian leather shoes already collecting dust. Inside he found Gabriel brushing down an old horse, Bandido, their father's favorite. The animal's right hind leg was wrapped in bandages, and he stood awkwardly, favoring his other legs. "Still wasting time with that lame horse," Eduardo called out. Gabriel turned, his simple black shirt and jeans a stark contrast to Eduardo's expensive suit. "He's not a waste of time," he said quietly. "Dad loved him." "Dad loved a lot of useless things," Eduardo replied, looking around the barn with distaste. "The lawyer's waiting at the house. Time to get this over with." Gabriel patted Bandido's neck. "I'll be there in a minute." "Whatever. Just hurry up." Back at the farmhouse, Mr. Mendez, the family lawyer, sat at the dining table with papers spread before him. Several neighbors and workers from the farm had gathered, as was custom for the reading of the will. "Now that everyone is here," Mr. Siiku Mendez began once Gabriel entered, still smelling of hay and horses, "we can proceed with the reading of Ricardo Suarez's last will and testament." Eduardo checked his watch. He had a flight back to São Paulo tomorrow morning. The sooner this was over, the better. "To my son Eduardo," Mr. Mendez read, adjusting his glasses, "who left to build his own empire, I leave the family estate, all financial assets, and the entirety of the farmland, with the exception of the northern pasture." Eduardo couldn't help the small smile that formed on his lips. Of course, his father might have been angry when Eduardo left, but blood was blood, and Eduardo was the firstborn. "To my son Gabriel, who stayed by my side through illness and health, who understood the value of family and home, I leave my horse Bandido and the northern pasture where he likes to graze." The room went silent. Gabriel's face revealed nothing, but his hands, clasped in front of him, tightened until his knuckles went white. Eduardo couldn't contain himself. A laugh escaped his lips, harsh and cutting. "You wasted your life for an animal and memories," he said to Gabriel, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And look what it got you." Mrs. Oliveira gasped. One of the farmhands muttered something under his breath, but Gabriel said nothing, just stood and walked to the door. "The northern pasture is only 5 acres, Eduardo continued, turning to the lawyer. "What am I supposed to do with a farm divided like that? It ruins the property value." Mr. Mendez gathered his papers. "Your father's wishes were clear, Mr. Suarez. The property lines are marked in these documents." Outside, Gabriel was already walking back to the barn. Eduardo followed him, irritation growing with each step. "This is ridiculous," Eduardo called after him. "You spend years playing the devoted son and all you get is a lame horse. Even you must see how pathetic that is." Gabriel stopped but didn't turn around. "You never understood Dad, or me, or anything about this place. What's to understand? A failing farm with outdated equipment and a bunch of sentimental nonsense. This place was his life. These people were his family when you couldn't be bothered to call on his birthday." Eduardo flinched, but quickly covered it with a scowl. Don't lecture me about family. I built something for myself instead of clinging to the past. And now you have everything you wanted, Gabriel said, finally turning to face his brother. The land, the house, the money. It's all yours, just like you always thought it should be. He walked into the barn, leaving Eduardo standing in the sunlight, victory feeling strangely hollow. 2 days later, Eduardo sat in his Sao Paulo office, overlooking the city skyline. His assistant, Mariana, placed a stack of papers on his desk. The developers are very interested in the farmland, sir. They're offering 20% above market value. Eduardo nodded, scanning the proposal. Tell them I want 30% above. That land has been in my family for generations. It has sentimental value. The words felt strange in his mouth. Also, Mariana continued, there seems to be an issue with the property lines. The surveyor found some discrepancies with the northern section. Eduardo frowned. What kind of discrepancies? Something about water rights and an access road. The lawyer says you need to sign additional papers in person. You're kidding me. Eduardo rubbed his temples. I just got back. I'm afraid it can't be handled remotely. Mr. Mendez was very specific. Eduardo leaned back in his chair, thinking of the farm he'd just escaped, of Gabriel's silent accusation, of the house that no longer felt like the prison it had been in his youth, but somehow worse, like a monument to everything he'd left behind. Fine. Book me a flight for tomorrow. I'll handle it myself. The farm looked different when Eduardo returned 3 days later. The front yard had been swept clean. Fresh flowers sat in pots by the door. The peeling paint on the porch didn't seem quite so bad in the afternoon light. As he approached the house, he heard laughter, something he couldn't remember ever hearing much of in this place. He followed the sound around to the back, where he stopped short at the sight before him. Gabriel was there, smiling, actually smiling, while a woman with long dark hair held Bandido's lead rope. The horse was walking slowly around a small circle, his injured leg touching the ground with each careful step, not quite healed, but not completely lame either. Eduardo, Gabriel said, noticing him first. We weren't expecting you back. The woman turned, and Eduardo felt a jolt of recognition. Ana Luisa, Gabriel's high school girlfriend, the one Eduardo had tried and failed to seduce before he left town for good. Eduardo Suarez, she said, her voice cooler than the warm smile she'd been giving Gabriel. It's been a long time. Ana, he replied, recovering quickly with his most charming smile. You look, well, I'm a veterinarian now, she said, turning back to Bandido. I've been helping Gabriel with his rehabilitation program. Rehabilitation? For the horse? Eduardo couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Bandido had a tendon injury. It's healing. Ana thinks he might even be able to run again someday. How fascinating, Eduardo said, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. I need to talk to you about some paperwork, Gabriel. Alone. Ana patted the horse's neck. I'll take him back to the stall and check his bandages. We can continue tomorrow, Gabe. Gabriel nodded, his eyes lingering on her as she led Bandido away. Eduardo noticed the look and felt an unexpected twinge of something, not quite jealousy, something else. What paperwork? Gabriel asked, turning back to his brother. There's an issue with the property lines. Something about the northern pasture and water rights. Dad made sure Bandido's pasture had access to the creek. It's in the will. Eduardo waved a hand dismissively. Legalities, we need to straighten it out before I can sell. Gabriel's expression darkened. You're selling? Already? What did you expect me to do with it? Play farmer? This place is worth millions to developers. This farm has been in our family for 4 generations. And now it's in my generation, which means it's my decision. They stared at each other, the gulf between them wider than ever. Finally, Gabriel shook his head. The papers are probably in Dad's office. Everything else is. Eduardo followed him into the house, noticing more changes. The living room had been cleaned, the old furniture rearranged. Photos he didn't remember seeing before hung on the walls. His father as a young man standing proudly with his own father in front of the barn. His mother smiling, holding baby Gabriel, while a sullen Eduardo stood to the side. What is all this? Eduardo asked, gesturing to the changes. Neighbors have been helping out. They bring food, stay to visit, talk about Dad. Gabriel glanced at him. People loved him, you know. They keep saying how much you look like him. Eduardo felt a strange tightness in his chest. I look nothing like him. Whatever you need to tell yourself. In their father's office, Gabriel pulled open the desk drawer. His papers should be in here. Dad kept everything. As Eduardo watched his brother sort through the documents, he noticed a bulletin board on the wall covered with newspaper clippings. Looking closer, he realized with shock that they were about him. Articles about his business deals, property acquisitions, charity galas. His father had tracked his career all these years. Found it, Gabriel said, holding up a folder. Property boundaries and water rights. But Eduardo wasn't listening. He was staring at a photo pinned among the articles. Eduardo receiving an award, smiling for the camera, unaware that his estranged father had cut out and saved this moment of his life. He kept track of you, Gabriel said quietly, following Eduardo's gaze. Every newspaper article, every magazine mention. He was proud of you, even if he didn't understand why you needed to leave us behind to succeed. Eduardo turned away from the board, uncomfortable with the emotion rising in his throat. Just give me the papers. I'll have my lawyer look them over. As he reached for the folder, a truck pulled up outside, horn honking cheerfully. That'll be Miguel and his boys, Gabriel said, heading for the door. They're helping me convert the old storage barn into a rehabilitation space. Rehabilitation space for what? For the therapy program. Kids with disabilities, veterans, elderly people who need animal therapy. It was Dad's idea, actually. He just never got around to it. Eduardo followed Gabriel outside, where several men were unloading lumber and supplies from a truck. Hey, Gabriel, called one of the men. We brought extra hands today. Word's getting around about the miracle horse. Miracle horse? Eduardo repeated. Ana appeared from the barn, smiling at the newcomers. People are calling Bandido the miracle horse because he's walking again when everyone said he should be put down. She glanced at Eduardo. Sometimes the things we value least turn out to be worth the most. Eduardo watched as Gabriel greeted the men, accepted their condolences about his father, thanked them for their help. He moved with a quiet confidence Eduardo had never noticed before, or perhaps had never bothered to see. And Ana, the way she looked at Gabriel was unmistakable. There was history there, and maybe a future too. For the first time since arriving back at the farm, Eduardo felt like the outsider. These people, his brother Ana, the neighbors, they shared something he couldn't touch, a community, a purpose, a connection to this land that went beyond property values and development potential. As the sun began to set over the fields his family had worked for generations, Eduardo stood apart, watching his brother laugh with Ana. Something uneasy stirred in his chest. Not quite envy, not quite regret, but a growing awareness that perhaps in his rush to escape this place and build his empire, he had left behind something valuable after all, and he wasn't entirely sure he could buy it back. Eduardo woke up in his childhood bedroom, the ceiling fan creaking above him. He hadn't planned to stay overnight, but after several hours of reviewing property documents with Gabriel, it had gotten too late to drive back to town. The house felt different in the early morning light, warmer somehow, less like the prison of his youth. He could smell coffee brewing downstairs and hear the distant sounds of farm life beginning, a rooster crowing, the soft whinnying of horses, the rumble of a tractor starting up. When he entered the kitchen, Mrs. Oliveira was there, making breakfast as if he'd never left. "Good morning, Mr. Eduardo," she said, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter to him. "Black, 2 sugars. You still take it the same?" Eduardo was surprised she remembered. "Yes, thank you. Your brother's been up since dawn, working with that horse of his. That Ana, she comes every morning before her clinic hours to help. Such a nice girl." Eduardo sipped his coffee, saying nothing. "Your father always hoped she and Gabriel would end up together," Mrs. Oliveira continued, cracking eggs into a pan. Before everything happened that summer." Eduardo knew exactly what she meant. Before he had tried to seduce Ana, before the fight with Gabriel, before he'd left for good, telling his father he was done with this backward place and everyone in it. "That was a long time ago," Eduardo said. Mrs. Oliveira gave him a look that made him feel like a child again. "Some wounds don't heal with time alone, Mr. Eduardo. They need tending." He took his coffee and went outside, annoyed by her presumption, but unable to argue with her. The morning air was cool and fresh, nothing like the smog-filled city he'd grown accustomed to. He walked toward the barn, drawn by the sound of voices. He stopped at the entrance, watching unnoticed as Gabriel led Bandido in a slow circle. Ana stood in the center, giving gentle instructions. The horse's injured leg touched the ground with each step, not fully healed, but noticeably improved. "That's it. Easy now," Ana was saying. "He's getting stronger every day, Gabe." "Dad would be so happy," Gabriel replied, his face lit with a smile Eduardo rarely saw growing up. "Remember how he used to say Bandido had the heart of a champion?" Ana laughed. "And you said he was just stubborn." "He is stubborn, like someone else I know." Gabriel's eyes lingered on Ana's face. Eduardo felt like he was intruding on something private. He cleared his throat, and both turned to look at him. "Planning to join us for breakfast?" Gabriel asked, his expression guarded once more. "Just came to see the famous miracle horse," Eduardo replied. "Looks like he's doing better." Anna nodded. "The tendon is healing well. Gabriel's been working with him every day, following the therapy plan exactly." "I need to talk to you about the property lines," Eduardo said to Gabriel, ignoring her praise of his brother. "There's a problem with the survey." Gabriel sighed. "Can it wait until after breakfast? We're almost done here. My lawyer is expecting my call at 9. "But take your time with your pet project," Eduardo said, turning to leave. "I'll be in the house." As he walked away, he heard Anna's voice. "He hasn't changed much, has he?" Eduardo slowed, waiting for his brother's response. "He has," Gabriel said quietly. "There's something different. I just can't figure out what it is yet." Back in the house, Eduardo found himself wandering into his father's office again. The room smelled of leather and the pipe tobacco his father had favored. He studied the bulletin board of news clippings about his career, still unsettled by the discovery that his father had tracked his success all these years. A small wooden box sat on the desk, his father's keepsake box. Eduardo had never been allowed to touch it as a child. Now, feeling like a trespasser in his own inheritance, he opened it. Inside were the expected items: his father's pocket watch, old coins, a lock of hair that must have been his mother's. But underneath these treasures was a stack of envelopes. Eduardo picked them up, recognizing his father's handwriting on the first one. "To Eduardo," it read simply. His hands trembled slightly as he held the sealed envelope. Before he could open it, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, he tucked the letter into his jacket pocket and closed the box. Gabriel appeared in the doorway. "Breakfast is ready if you want some." "Fine," Eduardo said, following his brother to the kitchen, the letter a heavy weight against his chest. After breakfast, while Gabriel took a call from the contractor working on the barn renovation, Eduardo drove into town to meet with Mr. Mendez at his office. "These property lines are a mess," the lawyer said, spreading maps across his desk. "Your father made changes to his will several times in the last year. The northern pasture that he left to Gabriel includes the main access to the creek, which devalues the rest of the property considerably." "Can we challenge it?" Eduardo asked. Mr. Mendez shook his head. "His wishes were quite clear. But there's a bigger issue. The development company you're in talks with has discovered that the land is zoned agricultural. Getting it rezoned for commercial development could take years." Eduardo leaned back in his chair, frustration building. "So I'm stuck with a farm I don't want and can't sell?" "Not necessarily, but you'll need to maintain residence there for at least 6 months while filing for rezoning. The committee looks more favorably on local landowners than outside developers." 6 months? Eduardo couldn't hide his dismay. "I have a company to run in São Paulo. You have executives who can handle things temporarily," Mr. Mendez suggested. "Or you could sell to another farmer, though you'd get much less than the developers are offering." Eduardo thought of Gabriel, converting the old barn into a therapy center, of Anna, looking at his brother with that mixture of pride and something deeper, of the neighbors who came bearing food and memories of his father. "I'll think about it," he said finally. When Eduardo returned to the farm that afternoon, he found a small crowd gathered near the barn. Curious, he parked and walked over to see what was happening. Gabriel stood in the center of a makeshift round pen, holding Bandido's lead rope. The horse was walking steadily, his previously injured leg bearing weight. A group of children watched in awe from outside the fence. "That's it, Bandido," Gabriel encouraged. "Show them how it's done." Anna stood nearby, explaining something to what appeared to be a group of parents. Animal therapy has shown remarkable results for children with these challenges. The connection between a child and a horse can break through barriers that traditional therapy sometimes can't reach. Eduardo stood back, watching as a small girl with leg braces was helped into the pen. Gabriel knelt beside her, speaking softly, then guided her hand to Bandido's nose. The child's face lit up with joy as the horse gently nuzzled her palm. "Your brother has a gift," said a voice beside him. Eduardo turned to find Mrs. Oliveira watching the scene. "Your father always said Gabriel understood animals better than people. What is all this?" Eduardo asked, gesturing to the gathering. "A preview of the therapy program. Anna brought some of her patients to meet Bandido. Word got around about the miracle horse who could barely walk a week ago and is now almost sound. People see hope in that kind of recovery." Eduardo watched as Gabriel lifted another child onto Bandido's back, holding them safely while leading the horse in a slow circle. The children's laughter filled the air, a sound so at odds with Eduardo's memories of this place. This was Dad's dream, Mrs. Oliveira continued, to turn the farm into a place of healing. Gabriel is making it happen with nothing but a lame horse and determination. And Anna, Eduardo added, watching the veterinarian chat with parents, her hands moving animatedly as she explained the benefits of their program. Yes, Mrs. Oliveira agreed. She always belonged here, even after you tried to take her away. Eduardo shot her a sharp look, but the housekeeper merely shrugged. Old people remember everything, Mr. Eduardo, especially the things young people wish they'd forget. She walked away, leaving Eduardo to watch the scene unfold. When the demonstration ended and the families began to leave, Eduardo approached Gabriel and Anna. You didn't mention you were starting a business, he said. Gabriel shook his head. It's not a business. It's a program. We're not charging anything. Then how do you expect to maintain it? Goodwill doesn't pay for feed and vet bills. Anna stepped forward. We're applying for non-profit status. There are grants available for therapeutic riding programs, especially for children with disabilities and veterans. So, this is what you're doing with your inheritance? Eduardo asked his brother. A charity case? Gabriel's face hardened. This farm was never about money for Dad, or for me. It was about what we could give back to this community. Very noble, Eduardo said. But noble doesn't keep the lights on. I have savings, Gabriel replied. And Anna's clinic is supporting the veterinary side. We'll manage. Eduardo looked at Anna. And you're on board with this? Throwing in your lot with a 5-acre pasture and a limping horse? I believe in what Gabriel's doing, she said steadily. And I believe in Bandido's recovery. Some things are worth investing in even when others can't see their value. The way she looked at Gabriel when she said it made something twist inside Eduardo's chest. He remembered a time when Anna had looked at him that way, before he'd shown her who he really was. Well, I hope you've considered all the angles, Eduardo said, because I've just learned I might be staying around longer than expected. The rezoning process could take months. You're staying? Gabriel asked, surprise evident in his voice. I don't have much choice if I want to sell to the developers. Local residency improves the chances of rezoning approval. Anna glanced between the brothers. I should go. I have appointments this afternoon. She touched Gabriel's arm lightly. I'll be back tomorrow to check Bandido's leg. As she walked to her truck, Eduardo noticed his brother's eyes following her. You never got over her, did you? He asked. Gabriel turned to him. Some people leave marks on your life that don't fade, Eduardo. You should understand that better than anyone. Eduardo thought of the letter in his pocket, still unopened. I need to make some calls. We'll talk about the water rights later. That evening, after Gabriel had gone to check on Bandido one last time before bed, Eduardo sat alone on the porch, his father's letter in his hands. The night was quiet except for the chirping of crickets and the occasional distant neigh from the barn. He broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside, his father's familiar handwriting making his throat tighten unexpectedly. My son, it began. Eduardo started reading, his hands growing less steady with each line. By the time he finished, tears were streaming down his face, the first he'd shed since leaving this place all those years ago. He sat there for a long time, the letter clutched in his hand, looking out over the darkened fields where he'd once played as a boy, where his father had taught him to ride, where he'd first felt the pull of something greater waiting for him beyond the horizon. In the barn, Bandido whinnied, a sound of contentment of being home. Eduardo wiped his eyes and folded the letter carefully, placing it back in its envelope. Tomorrow would be time enough to decide what to do with his father's words. For tonight, he simply sat and remembered what it had felt like to belong somewhere, before ambition and resentment had driven him away from everything that mattered. In the morning light, things might look different. The farm, his brother, the choice before him. And perhaps the miracle of the lame horse wasn't just about healing a damaged leg, but about offering a second chance to a damaged heart. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Eduardo sat at the table, coffee growing cold in front of him. He hadn't slept much after reading his father's letter. The words had kept him awake, echoing in his mind like accusations. My son, his father had written, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've finally come home. I've watched your success from afar, every building you've raised, every deal you've closed. I've been proud of your accomplishments, even as I grieved the price you paid for them. You ran from this place thinking you were running towards something better, but I've always believed you were running from pain instead. The pain of your mother's death, the burden of a legacy you never asked for, the shadow of a father who didn't know how to show love except through work and land. Eduardo took a deep breath, remembering the next lines. I left you the farm because it was always meant to be yours as the firstborn, but I wonder if in trying to give you everything, I somehow gave you nothing that truly mattered. Your brother stayed, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he found something here worth keeping, something I fear you may never find in all your tall buildings and bank accounts. The sound of the screen door opening broke into his thoughts. Gabriel entered, already sweaty from morning chores. You're up early, Gabriel said, heading for the coffee pot. Eduardo watched his brother, the easy way he moved in this house, the quiet confidence he carried now. So different from the quiet, uncertain boy Eduardo remembered. I read Dad's letter last night, Eduardo said. Gabriel paused, cup in hand. What letter? I found it in his box. It was addressed to me. Eduardo's fingers drummed on the table. Did you know he kept track of my career? Every article, every mention in the business pages. Gabriel poured his coffee. He was proud of you in his way. He said I was running away from pain, that I'd never find what matters. Eduardo looked up at his brother. What did he mean by that? Gabriel sat across from him, studying his face. Dad wasn't good with words when he was alive. Interesting that he found them after death. Answer the question, Gabriel. Gabriel sighed. Look around you, Eduardo. This farm isn't just land and buildings, it's community, it's purpose. It's knowing your place in the world and being content with it. He gestured toward the window. Dad found peace here. I've found it too. And I haven't? Have you? Gabriel asked simply. Before Eduardo could answer, the sound of a vehicle pulling up interrupted them. Through the window, they saw Anna's truck stopping in front of the house. She's early today, Gabriel said, standing up with a smile that transformed his face. Eduardo watched his brother go out to meet Anna, the letter's words still burning in his mind. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to do, built an empire, made his fortune, proved to everyone who'd ever doubted him that Eduardo Suarez was more than just a farmer's son. So why did Gabriel's simple life suddenly seem like the richer one? Outside, Anna was laughing at something Gabriel said, her hand touching his arm briefly. Eduardo remembered when she used to look at him that way, back when they were all younger, before he'd tried to steal her from his brother out of nothing more than boredom and the need to prove he could. The memory of what he'd done made him uncomfortable now, in a way it never had before. Eduardo stood and walked outside to join them, forcing a smile. Good morning, Anna. Eduardo? She nodded, her smile cooling slightly. Gabriel tells me you're staying for a while. Seems that way. Rezoning issues. Well, you'll get to see Bandido's progress firsthand then, she said. He's responding to treatment even better than I expected. Gabriel mentioned you're applying for non-profit status for this therapy program, Eduardo said. I might be able to help with that. I know people in government. Both Gabriel and Anna looked at him with surprise. That's generous of you, Gabriel said cautiously. I'm not completely heartless, Eduardo replied. Besides, it's a tax write-off. Anna raised an eyebrow. Always the businessman. It's who I am, Eduardo said, meeting her gaze directly. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement perhaps of their shared history. Then Anna turned back to Gabriel. Let's check Bandido's leg. I brought the new anti-inflammatory I was telling you about. As they walked toward the barn, Eduardo called after them, I need to go into town this morning. I'll be back later to discuss those property issues. In town, Eduardo met again with Mr. Mendez, but his mind kept wandering from the legal documents in front of him. Mr. Suarez, did you hear what I said about the water rights? The lawyer asked. Sorry, what was that? Mr. Mendez frowned. The creek access is vital to the property value. We need to negotiate an easement with your brother if you want to proceed with the sale. And if Gabriel refuses, then the development deal will likely fall through. No commercial property can be built without guaranteed water access. Eduardo rubbed his temples. Is there another option? You could sell the entire property to a different buyer, someone interested in keeping it as farmland, but you'd get perhaps a third of what the developers are offering. Eduardo stared out the office window at the small town square. He'd always looked down on this place, too small, too provincial, too unchanging. But now he noticed things he'd overlooked before, people greeting each other by name, a sense of community, the slower pace that allowed for actual living instead of just existing. What if I don't sell? He asked suddenly. Mr. Mendez looked surprised. That would be your prerogative, of course, but I thought your intention was clear. It was. I'm just considering all options. After his meeting, Eduardo found himself driving not back to the farm, but to Anna's veterinary clinic on the edge of town. He parked outside the small building, gathering his thoughts before going in. The receptionist looked up as he entered. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to speak with Dr. Ana Luisa, please. Tell her it's Eduardo Suarez." A few minutes later, Ana appeared from a back room, still wearing her lab coat. Her expression was guarded. "Eduardo, this is unexpected. Do you have a minute to talk?" She checked her watch. "I have another appointment in 20 minutes. "It won't take long." She led him to her small office and closed the door. "What's this about? Is Bandido okay?" "Bandido is fine. This isn't about the horse." Eduardo took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize." Anna's eyebrows rose. "For what specifically? For what happened that summer, when I tried to come between you and Gabriel?" He met her eyes. "It was selfish and cruel. I did it because I could, not because I cared." Anna leaned against her desk, studying him. "That was 8 years ago, Eduardo. We were all different people then. Were we? I'm not sure I was that different. And now?" Eduardo looked around her modest office, the veterinary certificates on the wall, photos of her with various animals, a small frame holding a picture of her and Gabriel at what looked like a community barbecue. "Now, I'm not sure who I am anymore," he admitted. "Coming back here has confused things." Anna was quiet for a moment. "Your brother missed you, you know, all these years, even after what you did." Eduardo hadn't expected that. He never said anything. "Gabriel doesn't say much, but he feels deeply." She straightened up. "Why are you really here, Eduardo, after all this time?" "I told you, rezoning issues—" "No," she interrupted. "Here in my office, today." Eduardo hadn't planned this visit, hadn't rehearsed what to say. The words came unbidden. "Because when I see you with him, I remember who we all were before I left, and for the first time, I'm wondering if I made the right choice." Something flickered in Anna's eyes. Surprise, confusion, perhaps a hint of the old attraction they'd once shared. But then she shook her head. "You made your choice, Eduardo, and after you left, Gabriel and I found our way back to each other. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And now? Is it still real?" She hesitated just long enough for Eduardo to notice. "I need to get back to my patients." As Eduardo drove back to the farm that afternoon, his conversation with Anna replayed in his mind. Her hesitation troubled him. Was there still something between them? And more disturbing, why did he care? He'd never been the sentimental type. Relationships were transactions, partnerships formed for mutual benefit. His few serious girlfriends in São Paulo had been like him, ambitious, practical, uninterested in messy emotions. But being back on the farm was stirring up feelings he'd thought long buried, memories of simpler times, of belonging somewhere, of connections that went deeper than business deals. When he arrived, he found Gabriel in the newly renovated barn, setting up equipment for the therapy program. The old storage space had been transformed, fresh paint, new flooring, ramps for accessibility. "This looks professional," Eduardo commented, genuinely impressed. Gabriel glanced up, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks. We're hoping to welcome our first official therapy group next week." "You've done all this in just a few days." "Neighbors helped. That's how things work around here." Eduardo picked up a brochure from a stack on a table. "Healing Hooves Therapy Program," he read. "Sounds official. Anna designed it. She's been planning this for years, actually. Dad's bequest of Bandido just accelerated things." Eduardo studied his brother. "You're in love with her again, aren't you?" Gabriel's hands stilled on the equipment he was arranging. "I never stopped loving her, even after I tried to take her away." "Even then," Gabriel turned to face him. "Why are you asking about this now?" Eduardo set down the brochure. "I went to see her today to apologize for the past." Gabriel's expression hardened. "Why? What's your angle?" "No angle. Just trying to make things right." "After 8 years?" Gabriel shook his head. "I don't believe you, Eduardo. You've never done anything without calculating the benefit to yourself first." The accusation stung, partly because it had always been true. "Maybe I'm changing." "People like you don't change," Gabriel said quietly. "You take what you want and move on. It's what you've always done." Eduardo felt a flash of the old anger. "You don't know me anymore." "I know enough," Gabriel replied. "Whatever game you're playing with Anna, stop it. She deserves better." "Better than me, you mean?" "Yes." The brothers stared at each other, the gulf between them suddenly as wide as it had ever been. "I should check on Bandido," Gabriel said finally, turning away. Eduardo watched him go, frustrated by his inability to express what he was feeling. The truth was, he didn't fully understand it himself. Being back here was awakening something in him, something he'd spent years denying. That night, unable to sleep, Eduardo walked out to the barn. The moon was full, casting silver light across the paddocks. He found Bandido in his stall, ears pricking forward at the sound of a visitor. "Hello, old boy," Eduardo said softly, reaching out to stroke the horse's neck. "Causing quite a stir around here, aren't you?" Bandido nickered softly, pushing his nose against Eduardo's hand. "I never understood what Dad saw in you," Eduardo continued, surprised by how natural it felt to talk to the animal. "Just an ordinary horse. Nothing special. Except Bandido wasn't ordinary anymore. He was walking when everyone said he never would again. There was something remarkable in that kind of resilience. You know, he left you to Gabriel because he knew my brother would never give up on you," Eduardo said. "Just like Gabriel never gave up on this place, or on Anna," he sighed. "Or on me, I suppose, though God knows I gave him every reason to." Bandido shifted in his stall, his injured leg moving more freely than before. "I read Dad's letter," Eduardo told the horse. "He said I was running from pain, that I'd never find what truly matters." He laughed softly. The old man still knew how to hit where it hurts. A sound at the barn door made Eduardo turn. Gabriel stood there, watching him. "You're up late," Gabriel said. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." An awkward silence fell between them. "I'm sorry about earlier," Eduardo said finally. "About Anna." Gabriel came further into the barn. "You always had a way with her, even back then. Nothing happened between us, you know, not really. She never betrayed you." "I know." Gabriel leaned against the stall door. "But you wanted her to." That was enough. Eduardo couldn't deny it. "I was different then, were you?" Gabriel's voice was quiet but intent. "Or are you just playing the same game now?" "What game?" "Taking what's mine because you can, because you've never had enough." Eduardo felt a surge of the old defensiveness. "I built something of myself, Gabriel. I didn't just stay safe in the same place I was born." "Is that what you think I did? Played it safe?" Gabriel shook his head. "It takes courage to stay, Eduardo. To commit to one place, one life, one love. To face the same people every day knowing they've seen you at your worst and your best." "I never thought of it that way," Eduardo admitted. "You never thought about us at all once you left." The accusation hung in the air between them. Eduardo wanted to deny it, but the truth was more complicated. "I thought about you," he said slowly, "about this place. But I convinced myself I was better off without it all. That success would prove I'd made the right choice." "And did it?" Eduardo looked around the barn, at Bandido in his stall, at the moonlight streaming through the open door, at his brother's face, so like their father's now. "I don't know anymore," he said honestly. Gabriel nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "Dad's letter? What did it say?" Eduardo hesitated, then reached into his pocket where he'd been carrying the folded paper. "Read it yourself." Gabriel took the letter and moved toward the barn door where the moonlight was stronger. Eduardo watched his brother's face as he read, saw the emotions crossing it, surprise, grief, understanding. When Gabriel finished, he carefully refolded the paper and handed it back. "He never said any of this to me." "He never said it to me either," Eduardo replied. "That was Dad's way, keep it all inside until it's too late. He said he was proud of you, and that I'd never find what truly matters." The brothers looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that they were more alike than either wanted to admit. Both shaped by the same father, the same loss, the same farm. Bandido whinnied softly in his stall, as if reminding them of his presence. "You should get some rest," Gabriel said finally. "The contractor's coming tomorrow to discuss the water access issue." "Right." Eduardo turned to leave, then stopped. "Gabriel, that summer with Anna, I really am sorry." Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. 8 years is a long time to wait for an apology. "I know, but it's never too late to start fixing what's broken." As Eduardo walked back to the house under the moonlit sky, those words echoed in his mind. Was that what he was trying to do? Fix what was broken? Or was this just another game, as Gabriel suspected? The truth was, Eduardo wasn't sure anymore. He only knew that with each passing day, the pull of this place, and the people in it, was growing stronger. The empire he'd built in Sao Paulo seemed increasingly distant and hollow compared to the simple, meaningful life his brother had created here. And somewhere in that realization was a truth he wasn't quite ready to face, that perhaps his father had been right all along, that in running from pain, he might have been running from everything that mattered. A week passed at the farm, bringing changes both visible and invisible. The therapy barn was completed, with its freshly painted sign reading, "Healing Hooves," hanging proudly above the entrance. Bandido's leg continued to improve, allowing him to walk with barely a hint of his former limp. And something else was changing too, something in the air between the Suarez brothers. Eduardo sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing reports from his company in São Paulo. The business was running smoothly without him, which was both reassuring and unsettling. Had he built something so efficient that it didn't actually need him? His phone rang. Mariana, his assistant, Mr. Suarez, the development company is getting impatient, she said without preamble. They want to know if you've resolved the water rights issue. Eduardo glanced out the window toward the northern pasture where Gabriel was working with Bandido. Tell them I'm still negotiating with the other landowner. They're considering other properties if this falls through. They need an answer by the end of the week. I understand, Eduardo said. I'll call them personally tomorrow. After hanging up, Eduardo remained at the table, torn between the life he'd built and the one he was rediscovering. His gaze fell on his father's letter, which he'd been carrying with him every day since finding it. The sound of a truck pulling up drew his attention. Ana had arrived for her daily visit to check on Bandido. Eduardo watched through the window as Gabriel greeted her with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. There was an ease between them, a natural connection that made Eduardo's chest tighten with something that felt uncomfortably like envy. He stepped onto the porch as they walked toward the barn together. Eduardo, Ana called, noticing him. Come see how Bandido's doing. The improvement is remarkable. Eduardo joined them in the pasture where Gabriel had been working with the horse. Bandido trotted toward them, his movements fluid and natural, nothing like the hobbling creature Eduardo had first seen. He barely favors the leg now, Eduardo observed. Ana nodded, professional pride evident in her voice. The tendon has healed better than I expected. Gabriel's consistent therapy program made all the difference. We make a good team, Gabriel said, glancing at Ana with undisguised affection. You always did, Eduardo said quietly. Something in his tone made both of them look at him sharply. The first therapy session is scheduled for tomorrow, Ana said after a moment. We already have 10 children signed up. That's great, Eduardo replied. Listen, I need to talk to both of you about something important. Gabriel's expression immediately became guarded. The developers, among other things. Can we go to the house? Inside, seated around the kitchen table where so many family meals and discussions had taken place over the years, Eduardo took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what to do with the farm, he began. The rezoning process is complicated, and the water rights issue makes it even more difficult to sell to the developers. So you're giving up on selling? Gabriel asked, his tone careful, as if afraid to hope. Not exactly. Eduardo looked at his brother directly. I'm thinking of a different approach. He opened his laptop and turned it so they could see the screen. I've been working on a business plan for healing hooves. Ana and Gabriel exchanged confused glances. What do you mean? Ana asked. The therapy program you've started has potential beyond what you've imagined, Eduardo explained, clicking through slides of financial projections and organizational charts. With proper funding and expansion, it could become a full-scale rehabilitation center, not just for children, but for veterans, elderly patients, even corporate team building. Gabriel's confusion deepened. Are you trying to commercialize our program? I'm trying to help you make it sustainable, Eduardo countered. Right now you're running on goodwill and volunteer labor. That won't last. We don't need to make a profit, Gabriel argued. That's not what this is about. Every operation needs capital to survive, Eduardo insisted. Even non-profits need proper management and funding sources. Ana studied the business plan on the screen. These numbers are impressive, but where would this money come from? Eduardo took another deep breath. From me. I'm proposing to invest in healing hooves as a partner. Silence fell over the kitchen. Gabriel stared at his brother as if he'd never seen him before. Why would you do that? He finally asked. This isn't your kind of venture. Maybe I'm changing my definition of a worthwhile investment, Eduardo said. Ana's eyes narrowed. And the rest of the farm? You'd still sell it to developers? Eduardo shook his head. That's the other part of my proposal. Instead of selling, I'd like to convert most of the farmland into an expanded facility. The main property would remain agricultural. We could lease fields to local farmers, while we develop the therapy center in phases. Gabriel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the land that had been in their family for generations. This doesn't sound like you, Eduardo. I know. Eduardo joined his brother at the window. Being back here has made me realize some things. About Dad, about you, about what I left behind. And what about your life in São Paulo? Ana asked. Your company? I have good people running day-to-day operations, Eduardo replied. And video conferences work just as well from here as they do from my office downtown. Gabriel turned to face him. You're saying you want to stay? To live here? I'm saying I'm considering it. Eduardo held his brother's gaze. If we can find a way to work together. Gabriel shook his head in disbelief. After all these years of wanting nothing to do with this place or with me, now you want to be partners. I deserve your skepticism, Eduardo acknowledged, but I'm serious about this. Anna had been quiet, looking between the brothers. Now she spoke up. Why the change of heart, Eduardo? What's really going on? Eduardo hesitated, then pulled his father's letter from his pocket. This is part of it, he admitted. Dad's words made me think about what I've been chasing all these years and what I left behind. There's more to it than that, Anna pressed, her eyes searching his. Isn't there? The question hung in the air, forcing Eduardo to confront feelings he'd been avoiding. Was it just his father's letter? Or was it seeing Gabriel and Anna together, witnessing the life his brother had built, a life of purpose and connection that Eduardo's wealth couldn't buy? Or was it something even more complicated, old feelings for Anna resurfacing, mixed with genuine remorse for how he'd treated his brother? I don't know, he answered honestly. I just know that selling this place suddenly feels wrong, and helping you build something meaningful feels right. Gabriel studied his brother's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. I need time to think about this. Of course, Eduardo said. It's a big change. Anna stood up. I should go. You two have a lot to discuss. She gathered her veterinary bag. I'll be back tomorrow for the first therapy session. After she left, the brothers sat in silence for a long moment. Do you still have feelings for her? Gabriel finally asked. Eduardo knew the question would come eventually. Anna was always special, he said carefully, but whatever was between us ended a long time ago. That's not what I asked. Eduardo met his brother's gaze. I admire her. I respect what you two are building together. Beyond that, he shook his head. I've made enough mistakes where Anna is concerned. Gabriel seemed to accept this answer, at least for now. Your business plan for Healing Hooves, it's actually good, professional. I do know how to build a business, Eduardo said with a small smile, even if it's not a real estate empire. But partners? Gabriel shook his head. I'm not sure we know how to work together, Eduardo. We never have. Then maybe it's time we learned. Later that evening, Eduardo walked out to the pasture where Bandido was grazing peacefully. The setting sun cast long shadows across the fields, painting the land in gold and amber hues. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Gabriel approaching. I've been thinking about your proposal, Gabriel said without preamble. And I have conditions. Eduardo smiled slightly. I expected nothing less. The therapy program stays non-profit. Any expansion has to maintain that mission. Agreed. And the northern pasture remains Bandido's for as long as he lives. That was Dad's wish. Of course. Gabriel took a deep breath. And we need to be honest with each other. About everything. No more games or hidden agendas. Eduardo nodded slowly. That's fair. The brothers stood side by side, watching Bandido graze in the golden light. The horse lifted his head occasionally, ears pricked toward them, as if listening to their conversation. He really is looking better, Eduardo commented. Anna says it's nothing short of miraculous. The tendon damage should have been permanent. Gabriel glanced at his brother. Maybe there's a lesson there. About healing old injuries? Eduardo asked. About not giving up on something just because it seems broken beyond repair. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that went far beyond a horse's injured leg. I never hated you, you know, Gabriel said suddenly. Even after everything. Eduardo swallowed hard. I know. That almost made it worse. Why? Because I didn't deserve your forgiveness. Eduardo looked at his brother directly. I still don't. It's not about deserving, Gabriel replied. It's about family. The next day dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for the first official therapy session at Healing Hooves. Eduardo watched from a distance as Gabriel and Anna welcomed 5 children with various disabilities and their parents. The joy on the children's faces as they interacted with Bandido was unmistakable. Anna was in her element, professionally explaining the benefits of equine therapy to the parents, while helping Gabriel position a young girl with leg braces onto Bandido's back. The horse stood perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of his role. They're good together, Mrs. Oliveira said, appearing beside Eduardo on the porch. They always were, Eduardo agreed. And where does that leave you? The housekeeper asked with her usual directness. Eduardo considered the question. Building something new, I hope, something that matters. That afternoon, after the therapy session ended and the families had gone, Eduardo found Gabriel in the barn, brushing down Bandido. "It went well today," Eduardo said. "Those kids were transformed." Gabriel nodded, continuing to brush the horse's gleaming coat. "This is just the beginning. We already have a waiting list." "I've been thinking about your conditions," Eduardo said. "I agree to all of them. And I have the paperwork drawn up for a formal partnership, whenever you're ready to look at it." Gabriel set down the brush and faced his brother. "Are you sure about this, Eduardo?" "Really sure. Because these people, those children today, they're counting on consistency, on commitment. I'm sure." Eduardo reached into his pocket and pulled out their father's letter. "I want you to have this." Gabriel looked surprised. "It's addressed to you. It's about both of us. About this place." Eduardo pressed the letter into his brother's hand. "He loved you more than I ever realized, Gabriel." Something in Eduardo's voice made Gabriel look at him sharply. But before he could respond, Eduardo turned and headed for the barn door. "Where are you going?" Gabriel called after him. "To call the developers and officially withdraw my property from consideration," Eduardo replied without turning around. "It's time to commit to what matters." As Eduardo walked across the yard toward his car where his phone was charging, he heard a sound that made him stop in his tracks, the thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth. He turned to see Bandido galloping, yes, galloping, across the pasture toward him, with Gabriel running behind, his face a mask of shock and wonder. The horse pulled up beside Eduardo, breathing hard, eyes bright with an intelligence that seemed almost human. For a moment, man and horse regarded each other, something unspoken passing between them. "That's impossible," Eduardo whispered. He was lame. The tendon was damaged beyond repair. Gabriel caught up to them, breathless. "I've never seen him move like that, not even before the injury." Bandido nickered softly, nudging Eduardo's shoulder with his nose. "It's like he knew," Gabriel said in wonder. "Like he understood what you just said about committing to what matters." From the edge of the barn, Anna watched the scene unfold, the two brothers standing side by side, equals at last, with the miracle horse between them. Her heart swelled with emotions too complex to name. She'd loved Gabriel for as long as she could remember, his steadiness, his quiet strength, his unwavering loyalty. But seeing Eduardo change, watching him choose this place and these people over his empire, it stirred feelings she thought long buried. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Anna turned back toward the barn, a tear running down her cheek. The choice before her was impossible, the man who had always been her rock, or the man who had broken her heart, but now seemed determined to heal it. Behind her, Bandido whinnied loudly as if calling her back. But some decisions couldn't be made in the heat of emotion. Some choices required time and the wisdom to know one's own heart. The first drops of rain began to fall as the brothers led Bandido back to the shelter of the barn, their silhouettes merging into one shadow against the darkening sky. Inside the barn, safe from the approaching storm, Gabriel unfolded his father's letter and began to read, while Eduardo stood beside him, finally home where he belonged.